All right. So hello, everybody. Welcome to Pisa. My name is Andrea Malchiodi, and I'm the current director of the De Giorgi Mathematical Research Center. I'll just say a few words before we start. The center was founded about 25 years ago, formally as a research laboratory of Scuola Normale, but with the aim of being like an aggregation center for mathematicians in the community of Pisa. And of course, there are people from the university and also a group at the Scuola Sant'Anna. And the activity of the center since the foundation has been workshops, intensive research periods, and we started recently also a colloquium series. We have visiting positions of two types. So there are chances to do research in pairs or groups. And we also have 2 years postdoctoral positions. Usually the opening is in November. Basically, that's all I wanted to say. I would like to thank the other organizers for bringing up this event. And I would like to thank also the staff of the center for the constant and valuable support. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. I will be super quick. Let me mention the other organizers of this event besides Andrea and myself: Alessandra Pluda, Matteo Novaga, Giovanni Alberti, Adriana Garroni, who's coming from Rome any minute, and Lucia Scardia, who should be present online from Edinburgh. Okay, so I'm very excited to get started. The first speaker is Eran Sharon, and he's going to talk about flowers. I don't remember. There's lily, there's roses, and one more that I don't remember.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm very pleased to be here in this meeting of mathematicians and physicists and engineers dealing with morphing in the context of 200 years of Gauss theorem. I'm sure we will hear different perspectives in which it plays a central role. Also, being here at this in Italy, in Pisa, in this lecture hall is also very significant, as we will see. So I will talk about the work done at the Hebrew University. The main stuff that I will show was done together with Michael Moshe, our postdoc Yafei Zhang, and my student Omri Cohen. Some older stuff was done in collaboration with these excellent mathematicians and students. The title was The Lily and the Rose, but I added also the daffodil. So we have 3 different flowers. They shape themselves into these iconic structures, and I will try to say how geometry, how Gauss and other mathematicians contribute or give them tools in order to shape themselves. Yet other examples, and one would wonder, this is a solid sheet of material, and it takes shape. It shapes itself, not by the way we shape structures. Anything around us is some solid that was shaped by molding, by bending, by extrusion, by machining. This is done differently. So this is the story here, and I will just sketch the structure of the theory that connect between growth and shape of thin sheets. The geometrical part of it, the mechanics, and then I will talk about these 3 different flowers, each operated or shaped by a different mechanism. So we start with the 200 years old geometrical fact. Gauss term, it links between intrinsic geometry and extrinsic geometry, between metric and curvature. And the intrinsic geometry are all these measurements one could do within the domain, the manifold we live in. If it's a 2-dimensional one, Then you can measure distances, perimeters of circles, angles in triangles, etc. This is all encoded in a metric field. If this surface is embedded in 3 dimensions, it takes a shape, and we as observers can characterize its extrinsic geometry, and it is done by the curvature field, the rate of change of the normal to the surface when we move on coordinates, on our coordinates. And it has principal curvature, the largest and the smallest one at each point. It's a field, tensorial field. And the product of these 2 curvatures is the Gaussian curvature. It's a scalar field. And just to give some intuition, so here are 3 archetypical surfaces. If the curvatures K1 and K2 are pointing to the same direction, be it plus or minus, it doesn't matter, then we talk about positive Gaussian curvature. The product is positive. So if they are pointing in opposite direction, like in a saddle, then this is a negative curvature point on the surface. And if one of them is 0 or 2 of them is 0, like here, then it's flat, 0 Gaussian curvature, Euclidean geometry. And this is about the shape. I talked about how it looks, curving up, curving down. The normal rotates this way, that way. Now, the interesting thing, the connection, which Gauss formulated quantitatively, is that this property, which I presented as an extrinsic property, is completely determined by the metric field and its derivatives. So in a way, distances, if I measure distances within my manifold, I can tell something about its shape when it is embedded in 3 dimensions. Now, we can invert it. So this way was, I have a surface, it has intrinsic geometry, it has extrinsic geometry. I know that they are connected. I know, for example, that if I have an initially Euclidean sheet, like this flat sheet with 0 Gaussian curvature, then I can transform it into this shape without changing distances, without stretching it, without changing the metric. I cannot wrap a sphere with it because it means that I need to change the metric. I need to change distances and so on. But now let's switch the thing and define another type of metric. So, and this is about how growth shapes surfaces or self-morphing. So we will think about a sheet, and some intrinsic inelastic properties occur within it. It grows, it swells, it shrinks, things reorient themselves, etc., etc. There's a field of deformation, of inelastic deformation. We can say that these local equilibrium distances are well defined, and we can describe them by a metric field which we call the reference metric. So if my material point swelled by some factor, I can write the transformation of the originally flat Euclidean metric by a local transformation. I get some metric field. This is what the material wants to do. If it obeys it, then it is relaxed. It is not stretched. So we introduce the notion of reference metric, and then we go straight ahead, like the same things, like I showed before, Gauss, etc. This means that growth, since it defines a reference metric, and the reference metric defines Gaussian curvature, then we have the link between lateral growth and 3-dimensional shape. Okay, this is about geometry, but it's not the end of the story. We talk about mechanics. So just a small detour to plate mechanics, very, very, very briefly, for those who are not familiar. So I will talk about, let's forget for a second growth, and just talk about flat sheets. And so one way, there are many theories to describe plates with different levels of linearizations. And I will talk about a formalism which talks about energy minimization, like variational principle of elasticity. So if my thickness is T, lateral distance is much larger, L. So the energy of the system is some integral over some energy density, which is associated with deformation. And for thin plates, the elastic energy can be approximated or expressed in approximate as via the geometry of the mid surface. Like it is a three-dimensional object, but its mid surface has some shape. If I take this shape, I can express to some approximation, and there are issues about validity of this approximation, mathematical consistency, but I'm just describing the conventional way. So this energy density that we see here, this epsilon, is the thickness times in-plane strain. So if I stretched material, it costs me energy. If I double the thickness and stretch by the same amount, I double the energy. And the thickness cube times the curvature square. So even if I didn't stretch the midplane, if I made an arc, right, then my top surface is stretched, the bottom surface is compressed. To some approximation, I can assume this is a linear gradient. And if I integrate it, I get curvature square times thickness cube. OK, this is conventional plate theory, stretching term, bending term. Now, if we take our thickness down, 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 this prefactor decreases, but this one drops extremely fast. The ratio between them is T square in the rigidities of these two energies. So in the limit, when thickness goes down, this is very dominant, and this is floppy, but not zero. So if I compress this sheet, it will not stay flat and be compressed. It will buckle. OK, and I can feel with my hand the difference between bending and stretching rigidities. Now, if I create, this sheet is very happy in space and relaxed, no strain, no bending. But if I put it in some constraint and in a way that these cannot be zero together, they need to compete. So there is a competition, there is selection, shape, length scale, et cetera, and here are some examples. This system can produce defects, like localize all the strain, all the energy in points and ridges, or multi-scale wavy solution, like we see here, and there are many other examples. So this is just a minimum of energy of elasticity, and still it is so rich in behavior, in the shape of the minimizer of the energy. Now let's go back to the growing thing. So we want to include growth together with elastic response, and we want to do it with variation of the energy in the two-dimensional surface. OK, so growth is the issue here. So we do a very similar thing, but with different language. So this is our energy density. Again, stretching term, bending term, linear in T, cubic in T. The way we write the strain and the curvature is different from many linearized theories. What we see here are two expressions, two terms with bars and with no bars. And A is a metric, is a two-dimensional metric field, while A bar is that reference metric, what the material would like to be, the rest length of the springs that consist the sheet in the plane. A is the actual one. If the actual one is not equal to the reference one, then I pay energy, I stretch or compress springs. Same with the curvature. If I have some reference curve, my top layer grew more than my bottom one, so the material wants to bend. And if I flatten it, I pay bending energy. Now, the thing is that these are exact mathematical objects. They are not linearized as conventionally if I describe my shape as a function z of x and y. Usually I would linearize it. I will approximate the curvature of the second derivative, etc., etc. Here, at this point, this is exact. And it keeps the geometrical structure of the problem, which in some cases, it's extremely powerful and simplifies complicated problems into very simple ones. OK, let's go ahead and just say, so what is the process in self-morphing? This is our energy functional. Growth dictates the reference geometry, A bar and B bar, reference metric, reference curvature. The system chooses the actual metric and the actual curvature, the configuration, the shape, by finding the shape that minimizes this total energy. So this is the structure. Now, I could do self-morphing in a compatible way, meaning I will generate my, when I want a desired shape, I will first characterize its metric and its curvature, and I will make sure that my growth or my deformation will generate them. Then I will have A equals A bar. Remember, A and B are the configuration. A bar, B bar are some reference one. So I will have a zero energy. This is when I mold and cast shapes. If I mold a dome, then I have metric of a positive Gaussian curvature. I also have reference curvature of this, and no stress. But there is a very rich world in which of incompatible self-morphing. What does it mean? So, and here we start getting to our heroes. So to form a surface in R3 in our space, the metric and curvature must satisfy compatibility equations. One of them is what we mentioned is Gauss 200 years from today, meaning that the Gaussian curvature prescribed by the lateral distances by the reference metric is identical to the Gaussian curvature prescribed by the change across the thickness. That if okay, I think this is clear. Okay, this is the condition. The other compatibility equation is the Mainardi-Codazzi-Peterson two equations that guarantee that the normal to the surface is well defined. Any surface that two-dimensional surface in R3 satisfies this. No alternative. I will have a comment. So here we have already Italians involved, Italian mathematicians. I checked, none of them is from Pisa, but we will get to it. Now, if A bar and B bar, which are just dictated by some growth or information, local information that I encode into my system, if any of them, if A bar and B bar together violate any of these equations, then the sheet is incompatible. It cannot be, you cannot find a configuration in which A will equal A bar, B equal B bar. Now, this stars comes to say that actually its Ricci curvature is not zero. It's three-dimensional. So this violation of any of these equations is actually to say that at a three-dimensional object, the Ricci curvature is not zero, but we are stuck in our Euclidean flat space. So there must be stresses. If I consider it for thin sheets, it can take the shape of this split. And Ricci was here in Pisa. So this is one important connection. Now, this might seem like, okay, so what happens if this energy is not zero? I cannot have 0 and 0 here. So there is a competition like we saw before in the constraint sheet, and creative types of solutions appear. What are they? We should study. So the process is this. I have some growth, and I want to know what will be the shape. I need to see if it is compatible or not. If it is compatible, then OK, it's just fully determined. If it is not, I want to identify the incompatibility. And then I have to compute the energy minimizer, which is a very difficult task in general. But sometimes in some limits, there are shortcuts, and we will talk about them. Now, it might sound like very exotic and, not realistic problem, but no. Actually, this is the absolute default in growing surfaces, that things do not match perfectly. Also in self-assembled structures, yes, except in some very, very special cases, things do not match exactly, meaning there are residual stresses, meaning that we can describe them this way, and what we will talk further is relevant to many structures at all scales. OK. Now, limits, like in flat sheets, the thin limit, which we will focus on in this talk, is relevant when this is very, very small compared to lateral distances, meaning this prefactor is tiny compared to this one. So basically, in this limit, because any deviation here is multiplied by a huge factor compared to this one, right? So it's very rigid in plane. So the minimizers of this whole functional are the embeddings of the reference metric with the least bending energy. So if I'm talking about plates that have no spontaneous curvature, that are symmetric up and down, Antonio will talk about cases when you do have symmetry breaking across the thickness. But if this is 0, then it means that I will look for the embedding of A bar with least bending integrated over the surface. And this is proved by mathematicians. It's not just a heuristic statement of physicists. OK. Now, I'm an experimentalist. So we want to do experiments and to build such surfaces. And the earliest ones we built was already, so we need also to celebrate 20 years now for this. And we used a responsive gel, anisopropyl acrylamide. It's a hydrogel. It is like a sponge, but very, very, very delicate. And when the temperature of the water in which it is immersed is go above like 32 centigrade, it shrinks. It expels the water and shrinks. Now, the degree of swelling depends on the monomer concentration when I prepare the gel. If I take a very dilute gel, it shrinks a lot. Very dense gel shrinks less, as one would guess. What Yael Klein did at the time, she built this homemade mixer and took a dilute solution and a concentrated one and injected them into a two-dimensional or flat mold while varying the mixing ratio, while moving along here according to some pre-planned profile. So this solution flows with radial symmetry into the mold, and within a few minutes, it polymerizes. You open it, you have this kind of a very flat jellyfish-like structure, but it is programmed. There is information encoded into this material because it will shrink less here than here, for example. Then you can activate this metric by putting it in hot water. And when you cool it, it goes back to flat. Turn on and off the reference metric. So here we have a way to encode the reference metric into a surface and activate it. And in axisymmetric coordinate in a polar coordinate. This is basically our length element. So there is 1 times the rho square and some function f of the mixer multiplying this d theta element. Okay, you might think why there should be here also another swelling, but I can renormalize my r coordinate to include the change. So you can write it this way, and for this we can write the expression of the Gaussian curvature and so on. But let's first see this structure, how it behaves. So this is an old movie. It's a top view of a disk. It is more dilute here. It is less. It is flat when it is cold. This wave is simply because we hold it so it won't move. But when we increase the temperature, whoops. So it becomes into a saddle with negative curvature. And as the temperature goes back down, it goes back to its flat configuration. You can cycle it many times, and so on. So this is shaping via prescription of Gauss curvature. So completely according to this Gauss thermal egregium. And with this, you can do all kinds of surfaces, and you can use different techniques. And let's skip this slide and just mention that this self-morphing is now performed with different material, but different groups, different scale. This is a sub-millimeter scale done by Ryan Hayward. This is again same gel but smaller scale. This is in Tim White's group by pneumatic elastomers, and I think we will hear later talk about this. This is the same gel printed with some anisotropy encoded into it. This is lovely work by Lining Yao. Now she's at Berkeley. This was in Media Lab MIT. This is pasta-like structure, but non-uniform. And when you put them in the soup, they can take shapes. This is a work by Hillel Aharoni and Shu Yang, again, with pneumatic elastomers, solving the inverse problem. I want to have this face of Gauss. What should be my field of deformation? And these are examples. We might hear from Antonio and Marino maybe about this, how this creature inspired construction of mechanical structure. Again, that their shear, inelastic shear, local shear lines lead to change of the metric and the shape. Examples from Paris, Benoit Roman's lab, Emmanuel Siffer, elastic membranes with channels that are pressurized and expand non-isotropically. Encoding the right orientation leads to manipulation of the metric. And this is work by Ido Levin in my lab, that this thing can be completely autonomous. These are gels with a periodic chemical reaction within them. So here we don't change the temperature or whatever. There's some internal reaction which makes this thing change. This is a scanning of the 3D shape of the structure and so on. So there's a whole field of mechanics that is driven by Gauss theorem, by prescribing distances, converting them into shapes, not by explicitly making the extrinsic shape. That's the conceptual difference. Now, okay. So I will talk about plants, and one would say that plants are very complicated. They are not something flat, uniform, or homogeneous sheet. Maybe all of this is not relevant, but think of it. They are still on short time scale. They are still mechanical structures. They obey the laws of mechanics. Yes, they evolve slowly, but they should also have intrinsic geometry. They have extrinsic geometry, etc. So one old demonstration we did with a flat leaf, we put a growth hormone, auxine, applied it only along the edge of the leaf. It diffuses inside, and led to some enhanced growth near the edge compared to the center, meaning to some reference metric. And this is what this is eggplant. When we just applied the oxine and late, as the leaf grew, it became more and more ruffled and curly. So this type of mechanics and geometry is relevant to try and describe plants. So let's start. The lily. The lily, this is a closed bud of a lily. And we can see that it has positive Gaussian curvature, right? It has one curvature pointing this way and another one pointing this way. Both of them point inwards. So this is a surface with positive Gaussian curvature, elliptic surface. As it grows and open, we see that actually it has one curvature pointing this way and another one pointing that way. So it became negative surface with negative Gaussian curvature. Now, we know that this cannot happen just by bending the structure. Because we changed Gaussian curvature, we had to change the metric to be a metric that defines a negative curvature. So we can, and by the way, and this was studied some years ago in this work. So we will, it's not a priori clear that this is the way to model it, but this is the problem that we will study. We have a surface with no spontaneous curvature, it's a plate, up and down are symmetric, but with a metric which depends on the distance from the edge in some way, and it's a hyperbolic metric. So we started with, to express this notion of this function f, like in the gel, so we can think that we measure the perimeter as a function of the distance from the edge. The edge is here, and we integrate the circles as we go inside. And here there is this just a sketched shape. If you remember the Gaussian curvature, okay, we will get to it in a second, and we will look at it. Then there is an enhanced growth of the margins that makes this function look like this. Now, if we take Gauss term for this type of metric, which is so simple and symmetric, depends only on the distance from the edge, only this function, then the expression is very simple, and this is what we get. The Gaussian curvature here, the reference Gaussian curvature dictated by such growth profile is the second derivative of the function normalized with a minus sign. So here, the second derivative is positive. So we have, sorry, it's negative. So we have a positive Gaussian curvature. Here, since we increased rapidly towards the edge, we have a negative curvature, and so on. So we study basically surfaces with negative Gaussian curvature and zero reference curvature. B bar is zero. So, so for narrow ribbons, this problem is solved and is intuitive in a way. So this is work that Effie Efrati did at the time. If we look for translationally invariant configuration, then we get these surfaces that are rod or like helical ones with some profile of the ribbon to account for the negative curvature. And some of them are nearly degenerate. So this is very floppy system, mechanical system. Now you can generate this with the gels, and you can get all kinds of structures like this. So you see here the negative curvature, right? The curvature this way and curvature that way. And the interesting thing is that these helical structures, they don't have intrinsic handedness because it's just a plate. It's not, these are not structures that Antonio might talk about helices that are driven by B bar. So indeed, they are indifferent for right hand, left hand, and you can have often such defects that you go from left hand to right hand curling. This problem was studied in this reference. And depending on the steepness, not constant Gaussian curvature, but again, negative curvature, but depending on the width and the stiffness of this layer compared to the width of the sample, you can get a variety of configuration. I'm not sure, I suspect that this one is not a real energy minimum, but this is not very important. Now, this is for narrow ones. Now, what happens if we have a stiff midvein? This is what was studied here when there is a stiff midvein. This is what happens with the Lilly. The midvein, if you want to bend it, it costs energy. So you have a conflict. You want to generate negative Gaussian curvature. You don't want to bend too much because you pay energy for this. So it doesn't make sense to bend the entire structure just to account for this geometry along the edge. So apparently, and this is work that was done also mainly by John Gemmer, Shankar Venkataramani, there is this set of low energy in which the background or the interior of the sheet is flat. You don't bend it. And you manage to generate approximately the negative curvature by this cascade of waves along the edge. Here we see an example with so these are gels that we did at the time. So here we see this thing with a wedge. So we go from the narrow ribbon here, which generates this curled one. But as the width increases, it switches to this type of configuration in which the center is flat, and you generate waves for the same profile of growth. So this is our Lilly. So more examples in plants, in leaves, in which enhanced growth along the margins generate this waviness, and it is in a conflict with the tendency to be flat because of B-bar, and you get all kinds of structures of this kind. You can go to the garden and take leaves that are wavy, cut narrow strips parallel to the edge, and then flatten them, because this is a three-dimensional sheet. When you flatten them, you see, this is what you see. You see actually the intrinsic geometry of the surface, that you try to glue small radius outside a large one. Unlike here in the flat ones, as you go out, the radius of curvature, the geodesic curvature along these lines decreases. Here, it's the opposite, and it cannot be done flat. Now about the rows. Okay, so this is Mainardi-Codazzi incompatibility, we think. So when we look at it, and we look at this iconic shape and with these cusps, we ask ourselves, well, here it's a circular edge. You don't see a sign for anything like this. When you look at it evolving, you see that you can track back in time to see where the cusps were generated. The leaf was, the petal was rounded and smooth, and they just appear. Okay, so there's some incompatibility here. Something focuses this energy or the folding into those points, and we want to know let's see what the Gaussian curvature is, and so on. So if we do this, so we see the following. There is a gradual appearance of the cusp, as we saw in the movie. It starts with rounded, a little bit doubly curved shape, but then gradually cusps evolve as the amount of curvature increases. Which curvature? Okay, let's cut. If I cut parallel to the edge, these are flat sheets. So there's no curvature, no azimuthal curvature, reference curvature. If I cut perpendicular to the edge, I do see this profile of curvature. So very innocent, like intrinsic geometry. All the material wants to do is to bend uniaxially perpendicular to the edge, and this has to do with the vein structure in the petal. So here's the puzzle. So uniaxial radial curvature. But this means that since the metric is Euclidean, so Gaussian curvature of A bar is 0. But also, B bar has only one direction with curvature. The rest is 0. So also 0 Gaussian curvature in B bar. So no Gauss conflict. So apparently, the Mainardi-Codazzi equations are not fulfilled in this case. These are less intuitive. It is more difficult to describe, to understand or describe them, because we always imagine a surface, and once we imagine a surface, we already imagine a Mainardi-Codazzi. We imagine a normal. But if you think of it, if I say that there's only a radial curvature, reference curvature, so if I start from here, I move here, no rotation. I move here, the normal rotates to here. And then when I move here, I don't change its orientation. When I do it here, I rotate and I move, and I get to the same point with two orientation of the normal. And this is, and you can plug the reference curvature metric and see that indeed this is the case. So this is our metric. It's Euclidean in radial coordinate. This is our spontaneous curvature. And now we can do analytical work, numerical work, and experimental one. Simulating such structures show this transition as the amount of curvature increases. This is for different thicknesses. I will not talk about it. I think I want to finish within 5 minutes. It will be OK. OK, so as we integrate more curvature on the surface, we form this polygonal structure. Now, intuitively, we can understand it. OK, before we get into detail. So it wants to bend in this direction here, and in this direction here, and in this direction here. OK, so let's make this outside part of a torus like. And this is indeed what happens in small young petals, like here. But note, if I do it, I have curvature in this way and in this way. I have Gaussian curvature, non-zero Gaussian curvature. This is in contradiction with the Euclidean nature of the metric. So the system makes it piecewise Euclidean. It makes a cylinder here, and a cylinder here, and a cylinder here, and they meet with these cusps. So that's the story. Once we understand it, it becomes simple and intuitive. Now we can do experiments. How do we do it? Without too many details. These are printed structures of PLA, in the simplest home 3D printer. These plastics, when you print it, you actually stretch the polymers, and they freeze stretched. If you draw a line, think of it that there are stretched springs along the printing direction. When you put it in hot water, it softens and the springs shrink. So a line would shrink. So here we do two layers. One layer which is isotropic, and on top of it, a set of lines. They will shrink once we hit them, meaning they will induce curvature, azimuthal radial curvature only. And you can verify that indeed it is the right curvature, et cetera, et cetera. And you can see the type of configurations that are found. So this is this one, not very interesting, no symmetry. But here we see the evolution of the triangular configuration. Bigger one, either with more curvature or with larger radius. You get four-fold configuration, and 5 and 6, and so on. Now, we can take all the data from simulations and from experiments and compute the predicted transitions. Here, we talk about the thin limit, meaning we balance bending versus bending. No stretching is involved here. We just say that we want to generate as much of the reference curvature. We cannot do it as we saw because it implies stretching. So we balance between the cost of the bending in these tips and how much we manage to bend into the sheet. You see all this flat region is not satisfied. It wants to bend, but it does not. So I will not get into the details, but the prediction is that this is scaling. This is the data, which is consistent with the measurement. And the thing is, OK, these are not petals, but if you put it in a way like a petal that so on, then you can see that this is kind of the structure that appears. Now, the cusp. These cusps, we see that this is here we have a Gaussian curvature. We have curvature here, and we have strong curvature here. So this is not an isometry. This is already some refinement which always occur in any finite thickness system. Always you could improve a little bit the isometry, the zero stretching configuration, by reducing bending on account of a little bit of stretching. So if here we need to balance stretching and bending, again, just to show this is petals, simulations and experiments, and we can measure these things and define the depth of this sinking down, of this negative curvature, measure the Gaussian curvature, show that indeed there is a focusing of Gaussian curvature or stretch, which leads to stretching. I will not deal with the details, but again, there is a prediction of this W, the degree of going from straight line to the configuration. It depends on the radius, on the thickness, and on the curvature. And these are variations in the simulation of the radius and the thickness and so on. And in a way, to some good approximation, it works. I will skip these two slides that mainly say that in real plants, apparently stress affects growth. If there is stress focused on a region, the plant grows differently. Let's skip these things. These are it will take time to explain, but one could ask, OK, so if there is stress focusing by the appearance of the cusp, could it affect growth? And yes, we can show that if we flatten and look at under the microscope at the region where a cusp appears, so in the first few days, nothing happened. But after a few days, we see that the growth was altered. Instead of being convex, now it is concave. And this is an indication of a process like this. There is biology. It tells the system how to grow. It generates a geometry there with some incompatibility, which induces mechanical instability, stress focusing. This stress goes back to the biology and alters the growth, et cetera, et cetera. Now, in the case of a petal, it's not an interesting story because the petal does not keep on evolving into complicated structures, but one should think about embryos, evolution, et cetera, where such cycles are possible. Very last thing, the daffodil, which is a topological frustration. So think of a cylinder, of a ring of cells, and now I build a sleeve. Now, if the number of cells is constant, I have a cylinder. If it grows linearly, I have a conical envelope. Now I let it grow without any control, exponentially. So I get a surface called pseudosphere. And I learned that the name pseudosphere was given by Beltrami, who was also here in Pisa. So this is another connection. But this shape has an end as an axisymmetric shape. My perimeter grows faster and faster and faster when I flat like this. The next step, I want to glue a ring which is longer than 2 pi r on this circle of radius r. And now the cells don't care about embedding surfaces in space. And so you could guess such thing should happen, and maybe such structure. So this is not a daffodil, this is a petunia, but we will get to the daffodil. Such structures might be an outcome of such scenarios. So you can do it quantitatively using the Gauss-Bonnet formula. It's not so critical to the talk, but just to say that when I integrate Gaussian curvature over a domain, I define the geodesic curvature along the edge of this domain. Now, what is the geodesic curvature? The geodesic curvature is a trajectory of the three-dimensional curvature on the surface. It's how much I turn in the plane when I walk. So, for example, if I make a small circle on the globe, I rotate in 2 pi, like I did right now. But if I make a big circle on the same sphere, meaning I surround 2 pi Gaussian curvature on a half hemisphere, I walk straight. So my integral here over half a sphere is 2 pi minus 2 pi, 0 geodesic curvature. This is a geodesic. I walk straight. My steering is straight, and I make a circle in space, in 3D space. So this is the Gauss-Bonnet. Now, when we think about this funnel growing shape, again, we can do the same thing and say, well, I cannot integrate more than 4 pi curvature on such an object, 2 pi along. If it's symmetric, then let's just think about this. Then 2 pi along the rim, if it is flat in a plane, circular, but also just planar. Why? Because my rotation in 3 dimensions is 2 pi. So I cannot have the projection of it larger than 2 pi. But I can integrate, by growing more, I can integrate more Gaussian curvature than, because, so think of it, this is a geodesic, and all the geodesic curvature should be along the margin. If I increase my Gaussian curvature over the area, I have a problem. So I can generate these things. Now, the last thing related to here is that you can solve the problem, not in the daffodil, but you can solve it by cutting and removing this topological constraint. And this is, we are in Dini hole. So this is Dini surface. And this is exactly what happens. If I cut it, it can roll multiple times, and I can integrate as much Gaussian curvature as I want. But having this topological constraint induces a problem. And you can simulate it, and so on. And now, the last thing, I started a little bit later. This is work in progress. So this work of the negative curvature hyperbolic shape is old. We and others considered it, and we always thought it has to do with the properties of the hyperbolic manifold of generating more and more and more and more surface area. So how can you handle it? You have a problem with embedding it as a surface. Now you can ask, what happens with surfaces with positive curvature? They are like the most boring, sorry if someone works on them, structures, bounded and not going to infinity and so on. So if we think about a surface with constant positive curvature, everyone thinks of a sphere, which is correct. We have constant Gaussian curvature, 1 over r times 1 over r, everywhere, constant, fine. If I grow it from the equator to the north and south poles, if I start with a perimeter which is not r but smaller one, so we have a surface like this. So we have these singularities here. that account that the total Gaussian curvature is 4 pi, known. But now think of this scenario. I started with a larger perimeter. I integrate, I finish my 4 pi Gaussian curvature. This is flat, this is flat. But my material wants to grow more, and with positive Gaussian curvature. And here we have the same situation, like in the funnel. I want to glue a short ring on this rim. They don't match, they don't fit. And this is what happens in simulations and experiments. And this is the line of 4 pi Gaussian curvature. And we see the transition from axisymmetrical configuration to polygonal. And we see this transition, 4 pi, and then you break the symmetry and you generate these things. Now, unlike the funnel shape with a negative curvature, which is tricky geometrically, and if anyone is interested, I can explain why. It's very tricky to prove if it is or it is not an embedding with constant negative curvature. Here, we have good indication that this is not an embedding. This configuration, this is the Gaussian curvature. We see stress focusing Gaussian. We see very large fluctuation of the Gaussian curvature compared to the reference one. And we see it here. So this structure is residually stressed. It contains stresses, even though I didn't do anything incompatible here. It's just a property of the metric. My B bar especially in the experiment is consistent with the positive Gaussian curvature. But still I have this transition. It's not just local deviation of the Gaussian curvature. It is also here, what we see here, the integrated geodesic curvature as we go from the equator towards the edge. So it follows the reference one, but on the edge, whoops, it drops to 4 pi because it must be a circle, apparently. So there is a big deviation of the integrated quantity. Apparently, it is not enough to state that there is a lot of stretching, but still, it's again property that says that there is stretching here. And the thing is that it is not clear what is the origin of this frustration. It is frustrated. It is residually stressed, but A bar and B bar are compatible. So I just said that A bar and B bar, incompatible A bar and B bar are indication of Ricci curvature, not B0. But here it is 0. It behaves and it has the properties of a topological defect in a way that lies here in the hole. But again, there are still open questions here about this system. And currently, we don't have a full description of what is going on here in terms of the geometrical origin of this incompatibility. So with this, I would like to end. Thank you.
Very much. Thank you. Time for questions, if there are some. Marino?
These curved edges between I want to ask about, in the case of the rows, about these curved edges between the cusps.
The cusps.
Yeah, so presumably this is to improve the adherence to the B bar, right?
Yes, yes. Okay, yes. Let's look at here. So if it was a circular, I reduce my bending energy because the system wants to bend. If I stay flat, then I stopped here. But I can bend more if I generate some Gaussian curvature here, right? So this, I reduce my bending energy by rolling a little bit more, but on the price of generating negative Gaussian, a little bit like in problems of ridges, a minimal ridge, and so on, where Gaussian curvature appears, and its scaling of the depth and so on is this issue which we try to address.
And are you paying a little bit in bending in the wrong direction? Are you paying a little bit of energy in bending in the wrong direction? So not in the radial direction, but the other one.
This bending energy.
Yeah.
The fact that we are in the thin limit. I think we should think of it as a floppy energy. And yes, we didn't include this energy in our scaling. We did included this over sharpening here, but I can't say that we solved this problem properly. We think we captured the dominant energies, but by the way, such structures appear also if you take a rubber sheet and you just do this, or even then here it's because it's very, very stiff, then it's very, very localized. The negative curvature is just near the tip. But this is I think it can be studied not in this problem, but in simpler problem. But so it's true, it bends. I don't know if it is really important or not.
Further question from Axel.
Thanks. Also a question concerning the rows. If I understood this correctly, then the number of cusps you form depends on the size and how it grows. Is there any idea what kind of determines the location of the cusp?
Okay, so I think they are, if it was a circular, like the model that we studied, then you want them to be equally spaced. This minimizes the total energy. If you put two of them too close and two of them too far, you pay too much bending energy. Now about the real rows, it's more dirty and more specific system, but definitely you can and we did manipulations. You can eliminate a cusp, not old one, but a new one, and then a cusp will be generated nearby. And when you release it, it goes back to the place where I think it's bending minimization.
Maybe I have a curiosity. So you say that that the number of cusps that you see is controlled by a competition between bending and stretching?
No, it's bending and bending. It's bending. It's the cost of making a cusp. You pay for this, and as you grow in scale, suppose you have a fixed reference curvature K0, as we said. No, I will skip. So you want to bend as much to relax bending energy from the interior, but you are limited. So how should I put it?
Yeah, but basically my question was about whether thickness controls some of this, whether by changing thickness you can get different configurations.
The thickness does not change the, let me just go up. And we will see the dimensionless. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, so here we have our phase diagram. We have the normalized thickness and the normalized curvature. Both. This is what makes this scaling. Now this is bending and bending, but it's misleading because the thickness here is not, since it's bending versus bending, it is not a real parameter in the scaling. How should I explain it best?
Don't worry, you can explain it to me on Thursday.
No, yeah. Okay, it's the total amount of curvature integrated. So it has to do with the radius. It has to do with K0. The thickness, put them all together in a way. But I don't have a good explanation. I should think and give you an answer.
Very well. We'll have another chance on Thursday. So thank you very much. Thank you, Eran.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Antonio. And of course, thank you to all of the organizers for this conference. I'm also looking forward to the opportunity to talk to this mix of mathematicians, applied mathematicians, engineers, and physicists. I think this will be fun. All right, so I'm talking about a collaboration with two engineers from my home university, UCLouvain. This is Nicolas, a colleague of mine, who came to me with a problem that is motivated by r-variational adaptation, r-adaptive finite elements. So we're talking about solution of PDE by finite elements. And well, okay, let's get started a bit with the terminology that is involved here. R-adaptive finite elements are elements that are allowed to move. Yeah? So you're allowed to, in order to improve the quality of your solution, you are allowed to move nodes in your mesh, right? So you have a given mesh topology, and you might imagine that some of the nodes are better placed at some places than other. For example, it might be useful that if you expect some singularity at some place of your solution to develop, to have more nodes in that position where they're close to the singularity. Right? There are different adaptive finite element methods that applied mathematicians and numerical analysts have thought of. There are H-adaptive finite elements that refine or coarsen elements. So for example, you take a triangle, you add at each of the centers of the sides, you add additional nodes, and so you have, out of one triangle, you have made 4 triangles. Okay, adds accuracy, of course. Then there's p-adaptivity, where you allow, instead of maybe just continuous piecewise affine functions on your grid, you in some places you allow for higher degree polynomials, excuse me. Also, that might increase accuracy of your method. And then there's r-adaptivity, where you only move the nodes. Right? And there are some, okay, so in the literature, when people talk about r-adaptive finite elements, sometimes they allow for some modification of the topology of the mesh. Sometimes they don't. Well, they will not allow for refinement or coarsening of the mesh, but you can imagine some other topological changes of your mesh. Some people allow for them. I will not do that. So when I say r-adaptive finite elements, that means really the topology of the mesh is fixed and only nodes are allowed to move in the interior. Then what people do, what's the best way of moving your nodes? How is the solution improved? What's your quality measure for that? Well, what people are doing in applied mathematics a lot is that they define some monitor function that is dependent on your position x. And then they say this quantity represents somehow the quality of the local interpolation error, and you somehow want to have this uniformly distributed. So this is a bit, okay, here I'm waving my hands. This is not yet very rigorous, what I'm saying here. So let's try to be a bit more precise. Let's denote, okay, for definiteness. Let's say we are on a triangulation. So we're on a mesh that is triangular, and we have continuous piecewise affine functions. So the functions are defined by their values at the nodes of this mesh, and on each of the triangular elements, the function is affine. Okay. For most of the talk, this is going to be this, or even for all of the talk, this is going to be this. Then you have what I'm going to denote by U star, the actual solution of your PDE, and by UN, the finite element solution. And then for linear problems, what you may do is that you have all this machinery that you find in every textbook on the finite element method, Sear's lemma, so on and so forth, that give you energy norm estimates between, that estimate the difference between U and U star. Supposing that U star, your solution of the PDE, has sufficient regularity. Okay, this you cannot do for nonlinear problems in general. It's not quite as simple as that. There's no a priori, no natural norm that will measure the difference between the exact and the approximate solution. And okay, this is maybe a bit harshly formulated here on this slide, but one can say that for this reason, energy-based error analysis collapses. Right? You can't really do this anymore. Okay, as a calculus of variations person, not very difficult. There's a straightforward way forward, right? So what do you do instead? Well, the quality of your mesh will be given by how low you can make your energy. So not only the values at the nodes decide on, of course, on the shape of your function, but also the position of the nodes decide on your function. And you want to choose both such that the energy gets as low as possible. Right, so we are, of course, now we are in variational PDEs that rely on the minimization of some energy. Okay, so that is what we're going to do here. And then the natural error measure is just the difference between the energy of your finite element function UN and the minimum, the actual minimum of the energy. Okay, so this is what we're going to do here. For a fixed number of nodes, which is, so here the number of nodes is going to be n-1, which is, so this is what the parameter n, the meaning of this n is. We're going to minimize the energy both in the function values and in the position of the nodes. And we assume, as I already said, the topology to be fixed. Of course, we're not the first ones to worry about this problem. So here, these are, people have already been doing that. Here, this is a paper from 2004 by Tutti, Reddy, and Ortiz, where they look at a semi-infinite crack in a linear elastic solid, subject to mode 1 loading. So this is, of course, no, this is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to point. This is done this way. Up, back. So here, oh yeah, no, everything goes wrong. This is 1/2 of the crack, right? So here, the crack will be here, and the crack tip is here. So what is happening is, of course, that you have focusing of elements close to the crack tip. So this corresponds more or less to what one is expecting. There's a 3-dimensional simulation of the same setup. Okay, so as my engineer friends would say, it works. Okay, but what does this mean for us as mathematicians? What we are so we are optimizing with respect to the function values at the nodes and with respect to the node positions. And formally, you might write necessary conditions for minimization as 2 equations. Right? So you have the stationarity conditions with respect to the displacements, vertical displacements, if you like, and the horizontal displacements, also these the node positions. Well, the energy has to be stationary with respect to those necessary conditions. And of course, as is very well known, if you have a sequence of meshes now, where the coarseness of the mesh goes to 0, so you get finer and finer, the fineness of your elements goes to 0, get finer and finer meshes. And of course, we know that the equation of mechanical equilibrium, or rather the solutions thereof, will converge to the actual solution of your minimization problem. That is known. Right? It does not depend well, unless you do some very strange things with your meshes, right? If your mesh is in the least way reasonable, then this will happen. But the second equation here, configurational equilibrium, this is not so well known. What happens when you send the number of your nodes to infinity? And actually, so we've been a bit surprised by that. Even in the simplest cases, we have not found a limit analysis of this equation here of configurational equilibrium when n is sent to infinity. In this setup where you do the mesh optimization just with respect to the energy. Okay, so the question that we're asking is, will the solutions of the equation of configurational equilibrium, this one here, will this converge in some sense? And will we get a limit object? So, I mean, if you look at the previous slide, at this shape here, you say, yeah, that looks reasonable. Well, there should be some. Can't you formulate a limit object that when the number of nodes is sent to infinity, that represents somehow this behavior that you expect here? And what we are going to do, so we're going to answer this question in dimension 1. Right. So there, of course, the meshes do not have very interesting geometry. You just have an interval, which is going to be subdivided in n subintervals. But well, since this question has not even been tackled in this setting, absolutely reasonable to ask this question first. And another reason is that in dimension 1, we're going to be able to give a mathematically very satisfying answer to the question, whereas in higher dimensions, we're not able to give such a mathematical answer. All right, so let's get going to define the formalism in dimension 1. So our domain is an interval with boundaries A and B. And what we're going to define now, a reference mesh and an adapted mesh. It's going to turn out that it's useful to think about the adapted mesh in this way. So we have two copies, if you like, of our interval. One is upstairs, one is downstairs. Downstairs is the reference mesh. And the reference mesh is just equipartitioned n intervals of the interval I. Right? That's what's downstairs. Upstairs is the adapted mesh. And you go back between the reference mesh and the adapted mesh by a change of variables, if you like, which is piecewise affine. This object here maps from the reference to the adapted mesh, and they are supposed to be functions that are continuous and piecewise affine, and where the pieces are given by these elements in the reference mesh, by the elements of length b minus a over n. Okay, pretty straightforward also. Okay, fine. And then what we're also going to define are these, it's just a piece of notation, if you like. Piece of notation that the elements in the deformed mesh are capital X, I, N, which are the images of this X, I, N under these changes, piecewise affine changes of variables. Okay, notation, whenever I write bar, then this is with respect to the reference mesh. Whenever there are no bars, then this is upstairs in the deformed mesh. Okay, so somehow a useful mnemonic device. Right, and now we want to talk about piecewise continuous, piecewise affine functions on the deformed mesh, on the adapted mesh, right, where you have different lengths of the different elements. And the way that we capture this is that we're going to say, okay, such a function needs to be expressible as a composition of two functions that are defined on the reference mesh. Namely, you take the inverse function such a change of variables from the reference mesh to the deformed mesh, or to the adaptive mesh, and you compose it with a piecewise affine function again which is defined on the reference mesh. Yeah? So you define your objects on the reference mesh, but one goes from the reference mesh to the deformed mesh, to the adapted mesh. And of course, so you have to go in the other direction actually to find these things, because these things here upstairs. In the end, where you want to work is just in this deformed configuration. This is where you're going to define your energy. Okay, so in the end, this is just this is fixing the notation here, what we're doing. So whenever I write UN without a bar, that means you have a piecewise affine function, continuous function, on n pieces. Okay, but the lengths of these pieces is non-uniform. Okay, right. Okay, about the rest here, I've already said something. Okay, so these yn bar are these changes of change of variables from downstairs to upstairs. Downstairs you have the bars, upstairs you have no bars. And if I want to go in the other directions, then I write yn. So this is the map from upstairs to downstairs. The yn is the inverse of the yn bar. Okay, I could have written also y bar n minus 1, so the bar cancels the minus 1, just not to overcrowd the notation. Okay, but again, so this is just notation. So far we haven't done anything. Now let's consider an energy. Okay, and we take some energy density that depends on the position, on the function value, and the derivative of the function. So this energy here. We impose some reasonable growth conditions on the energy density and boundary conditions also, right? So we'll be talking about Dirichlet type boundary conditions here only. And it's very well known. I mean, existence of a minimizer is guaranteed in such a setting. And if your energy density is convex with respect to this gradient variable, then you also have uniqueness of the minimizer. It's very well known. Okay, so this solution to your continuous problem is going to be noted by U star. I'm mentioning this U star. This is going to appear again and again and again. So U star is the solution to the continuous problem. Don't forget that. That's going to appear again and again. All right. Now, technical assumption on the energy density to make our results work is some sort of convexity assumption, but it's stronger than just having convexity of the Lagrangian or energy density with respect to this gradient variable. It's a quantitative convexity assumption, and there's also some integral where you integrate your second derivative of the energy density, and there's this integration parameter is flying around here, and maybe you already notice this thing here appears as the rest term in Taylor's theorem for the second derivative. If you write up Taylor's theorem up to the second order, where the second order is already the rest term, such an integral will appear with the second derivative. So you see already the result. This is already going in the direction of the proof. It's going to be differentiation of the energy that is going to allow us to do what we want to do. Okay, so this in particular, this implies convexity, and so the minimizer, and that the minimizer U star is unique. And one very easy example would be, of course, the Dirichlet problem, right? So you take Lx at p 1/2 p squared, so this 1/2 derivative squared plus f of x times z. Z is the variable for the function, so fu, 1/2 u prime squared plus fu, Dirichlet problem. Okay, then you might ask yourself, okay, why is he doing analysis for the Dirichlet problem in 1D? What's so interesting about that? I repeat, I've already said it, but I'm going to say it here again. We're interested in the associated configurational equilibrium equation. And as far as I know, nobody has done that looking in the limit when you send the number of nodes to infinity, even in this very simple case. Okay, let's go on. Okay, again, saying XIN, those were the elements in the adapted mesh, so the elements upstairs. We said that UN, that's a symbol that we use for these continuous piecewise affine functions in the adapted mesh. Okay, so this we wrote as a composition in this way here. Yeah? So this UN is a UN bar composed with the yn bar to the -1. Here I've omitted the n's and the bars, and the -1 cancels out. So this means if for a given n, a function can be written in this way, then it is a function that is continuous and piecewise affine on the adapted mesh. And now what we're going to do is gamma convergence. So we want to nicely define our functionals for finite n on the adapted mesh. And the way that we do this is, first of all, we take the difference between our finite element function in energy and the minimum of the energy. U star is the solution. And we're going to write down here a scaling factor, n squared of this. And we're going to see that this is the right scaling in the sequel. And this is the case if UN is one of these functions that we want to talk about, right? So continuous, piecewise affine on the adapted mesh. If this is not the case, then we say, no, we're not happy. Plus infinity is the energy. Okay. Now, gamma convergence, I'm announcing. And the limit functional is going to be defined on pairs. The first one in W12 0, so 0 boundary conditions. And the other one in MBV, by which I denote monotonous BV functions on AB. They go from AB to AB, they are BV, and they are monotonous. Of course, this is not what I wanted. Here, we want, okay, so at the left, it has to be above A, and at the right boundary, it has to be below B. All right, and for pairs in W12 and Y in MBV, so V is a W12 function, Y is such a BV change of variables, we associate the limit energy 1/2 second variation of the energy in direction V. Okay, second variation, what is that? Well, you take the second derivative of your energy density with respect to the function and the derivative variable. Z is this variable, P is this variable. And then you multiply in the right way your second argument to this object. Okay, so this is the V-dependent part that you get in the limit. And then there's the Y-dependent part. Y is the limit of these changes of variables. Yeah, these maps that go from the reference configuration to the adapted mesh, or rather the other way around. There's no bar here, right? No bar, which means this map goes from upstairs to downstairs. Goes from the adapted mesh to the reference mesh. Well, but in the limit is, okay, you could ask, is there a mesh? But okay, I hope you get the idea. Right, so the second part, there's a constant factor here in front of it. And then there's the second derivative of the energy density only with respect to this derivative variable here. And then you have this factor where you have the second derivative of the your solution. If it's, well, okay, so here I wrote it down for vector valued functions UN, right? But I mean, if you are thinking about scalar problems, then this just becomes U star double prime squared, okay? And then here in the denominator, you have y prime squared. Okay, y in general is a BV function. Of course, you assume that y prime squared is integrable. Okay, if it's not integrable, then the value is plus infinity. Okay, of this function now. All right, so that's the limit function, and then statement of the theorem. You have gamma convergence, one towards the other. So that for first of all, compactness. The compactness for these changes of variable in BV, in some sense, it's trivial, right? Because you're asking, because you are bounded in BV anyhow. I'm going to talk about compactness in a second. And then you have this the rescaled difference between the finite element function UN and the solution U star. It's rescaled with a factor n, and this weakly converges to some limit in W12. Okay, and then we have, under this convergence, we have the lower bound as you have to have in gamma convergence, and then there's also the upper bound. The upper bound is only stated for a subsequence, right? So if you are given two limit objects, then there exists a subsequence nk. Yeah? So I'm not taking really the positive integers here, but some subset. And then for this subset, construct the sequence that attains the energy. So maybe a comment on this. I'm not quite sure if I'm already doing the optimum here. So it might be that I just haven't taken the time to really do this carefully enough. So maybe this subsequence issue can go away. Also, from an application point of view, so the way that I try to explain to my engineer collaborators why gamma convergence is a useful concept is to tell them, well, this guarantees mathematically that if you have a sequence of minimizers for your discrete problems, it will converge, after taking subsequences, to a minimizer of your limit problem. And that's what you want, right? No further assumptions, nothing more that you have to do. And this is still the case here, even if you have this subsequence, this unfortunate thing here that you construct your upper bounds only for subsequences. Okay, then going back in the limit. So if you look at the limit energy once more, well, in some way, at least in this v variable, which is which will express, which is somehow the limit of these rescaled differences. Now this v, or I should have written g here, because my v here has become a g in this slide. So these are the same objects. So okay, these both are limits of the rescaled differences between the finite element function and the solution. And they converge in W12 to G or V, okay? And now in the energy, this appears here quadratically, right? The V, if you're here, well, okay, you have it here and you have it here. So it's a quadratic functional in the limit. So again, you might say, well, in the limit, you get some energy norm, right? On some of the first slides, I was saying, well, for nonlinear problems, you don't necessarily have an energy norm. You recover this in some sense in the limit. But what's more interesting is, of course, the second term here that involves this limit of the configurational equilibria with the y prime. And yeah, okay, this is not quadratic in any obvious way, I would say. Right. Okay. So how does this result come about? Some comments on the proof. First, compactness, and there you're going to see already what's the main idea behind this. We write down, or we use Taylor's theorem, right, to write the difference between f of un and f of u star. Right, this is this here. So we differentiate the functional. We know that the first differential of this function is 0 by minimality of u star. So it only remains the second term, and we already stop at the second term. We write the remainder in the second term. Okay. Now let's write this down. What this is. So we're interested in the difference of this. We multiply it with n squared, as I announced earlier. This is going to be the right scaling. So we have this, right? So tau over here. I've introduced some notation. The gn over n, well, okay, it's the gn are these rescaled differences. In order to have it in direction un minus u star, that needs to be the argument. That's what it is. Now, the tau or the gn over n is just the un minus u star, as it needs to be. And then we write down what this is, right? I mean, so, okay, it's a second derivative of this energy density. And here this tau over n gn, this reappears in the argument of the energy density. And what remains here is just, okay, it's again, this rescaled difference between the finite element function and the solution multiplied by n. So these factors n I've absorbed in here. And that's, I mean, that's all the trick that you need to do, right? From now on, we're analyzing this thing here, right? So this is our functional. Because I remember this, the functional at finite n was defined in this way. Okay. And now the coercitivity assumption that I wrote down earlier, or quantitative convexity assumption that I wrote down earlier, was just that this thing here is uniformly positive in the sense of positive matrices. So I made the assumption such that you immediately get compactness in W12 here for these things. So there's not much to be done. You immediately get that this is bounded. So you get your convergent subsequence Gn, weakly convergent subsequence Gn in W12. And the compactness in BV is also trivial. I'm taking the trivial compactness, right? So each change of variables goes from the interval to the interval. So the total variation is bounded. I can take a subsequence that weakly converges, and that's it. Okay, that's all that I'm doing here. All right, now how do we get the lower bound? Okay, this is, as I said, this is our energy, right? This integral. And what we're doing, okay, so here there are these annoying terms in this derivative of the energy density that still depend on our un or gn. Well, and it's very well known how to get rid of this. Here we got gn over n. Gn is bounded in W12, so certainly gn over n converges strongly in W12 to 0. So, okay, so the difference between this one here and this one here, these things here go strongly to 0, so you may replace this by the main thing with this replaced by 0, then the integral in tau becomes trivial. It just gives you a factor 1/2, and these things here have disappeared, and what you have added is a small error. This is very well known, very controlled, how to do this. Now, what we have is we integrate over the interval a continuous function that multiplies these gn, and actually what's interesting in here is the gn prime, the little gn prime. So maybe I should go back to remind you what this is. Right, so this gn, this is what I've captured here. The little gn are the rescaled differences between the finite element function and the solution, and then the capital Gn takes the function itself and its derivative. And the term that is interesting is here the derivative of the energy density with respect to the gradient variable multiplied with Gn prime squared. This is the interesting thing. The Gn, this will converge strongly in L2 to something. The Gn prime, this will weakly converge to something in W12, which we get from the compactness of Gn in W12. Okay, and And what we do now is on each element in the adapted mesh, we replace all quantities but the Gn prime, so the weakly converging quantity, by constants. And the Gn prime itself, it says, so I look at it again, the Gn prime, what is it? The Gn prime, so it's the difference between a piecewise affine function and the solution. Well, the piecewise affine function is, of course, affine on each element. So if you take the derivative, it becomes a constant. This one here is not constant, or the derivative of this is not constant. So what this becomes is, when your elements get smaller and smaller, it becomes very close to an affine function. The difference between a constant function and some function will be, if you look at very small intervals, will become something like an affine function. Okay, and what you do then is, by hand, you integrate this affine function, or the square of the affine function, with a quadratic function. You integrate on an interval. That's fortunately doable. And so what you get is then, in some sort, you integrate on the microscale. The microscale is on one element. And what you get from this is then this result, right? So you have carried out explicitly the integration of a quadratic function. You get a numeric factor from this, 1/12. And this is what you get then. And after having integrated out on the microscale, the rest follows really from classical theory of lower semi-continuity for convex functionals. So you take this you are going now to take to the limit, and in the limit this is this is larger than the same object if you have then the 1 over the limit prime squared, right? Since this is also a convex function, of course. Okay, that was the lower bound. Now the upper bound. Well, and for the upper bound, you have to think about, okay, where did I lose? Where did I possibly lose energy in the lower bound? And there were mainly two sources. First, we needed to replace here these. We needed to get rid of these additional arguments in the energy density, or the derivative of the energy density. And in order not to lose anything, you need that this object here remains equiintegrable. So what you do is you construct your GNs such that there's some weak control on the L infinity bound. So weak control on L infinity. Then you can control what happens if you replace this by this. Right? Then you don't lose too much. If you do that, so some weak control over the L infinity of the GN, and then of course I said in the lower bound we use these classical lower semi-continuity results for convex integral functionals, and there we know, well, if you don't want to lose any energy, then you should have strong convergence instead of weak convergence for this step. And these two things you assure with your construction of your recovery sequence. You first define your this is the limit change of variables from upstairs to downstairs. There's a -1 missing. So this should be the inverse map of y. So you take this as the inverse map of y defined on the reference elements. So this is how you define your adapted elements, and then you average your limit function g prime, or the derivative thereof, to get your Gn prime. Right? And then additionally you make some suitable cutoff in order to respect this weak control in L infinity. And then this works as well, right? And this is okay. I'm going to show you some numerical results that have been done mainly by Darit, that I mentioned earlier. And we're doing this for really the simplest case, for the Dirichlet energy. So where you have the equation u double prime equal to f. Right? We're really looking at the simplest case possible. Now, what is the limit functional here? Simplifies to 1/2. Well, again, the Dirichlet energy of this limit of the differences, of the rescaled differences, plus this y-dependent term, right? And of course, well, as I said earlier, you have a decoupling between these limit objects. On the one hand, the limit of the rescale differences. On the other hand, the limit of these changes of variables. And the minimization in V is trivial. So you just set V equal to 0. There's nothing to be done. For the Y, you have some boundary conditions, right? So you need the Y to go from your interval to the interval, right? So there, this is minimization in Y is something non-trivial, and the minimization in Y gives you your optimal asymptotic mesh, right? So I've identified the mesh with a map from the reference configuration to this adapted configuration, and now I have a functional defined on this type of functions that gives me, after optimization, my optimal Y, my optimal change of variables, and hence my optimal adapted mesh, right? So this is how this works. So we're interested in the optimization of this functional here. And we note that, of course, well, thanks to the Euler-Lagrange equations, this here is just f squared, okay, which is also given in the problem. And this can, without any problems, okay, this can be done at the very latest in the second year of analysis to find the explicit solution of this. Right? So you first you take the Euler-Lagrange equations with respect, so the Euler-Lagrange equations with respect to y of this. You note that it only depends on y prime. So what you get is this equation here. That this is the variation of the functional with respect to y prime. So you have 1 power more. Needs to be a constant, right? Integration constant, and the integration constant needs to be chosen such that the integral over y prime is equal to 1, because what I haven't mentioned before, I'm here for the numerical example, we have set our interval to be the unit interval. Okay, so y prime needs to integrate to 1. Okay, so very explicit formula for your asymptotic mesh in terms of the data of the problem. Okay, and what we may do from this, okay, so now we have solved the asymptotic problem. Maybe one is interested in using this as a tool to almost minimize the variational problem at finite number of nodes. So what we can do is just, since at the same time y is this change of variables, we can just take the reference elements at number of nodes n and map them with this limit object to some adapted mesh, to some adapted elements xin. So this is one. Well, since you by gamma convergence, this object here is the limit of should be the limit of the minimizers, right? This is a reasonable assumption for the approximation of the minimum at finite n. Okay, and then you do numerics with this. So here we just put in some f here. F is quadratic on the left side. It's a Gaussian on the right side. And well, what we get our with this formula here. So this defines your yn, or in particular defines the positions of your nodes. And well, okay, they sit here. Okay, in this example, we have 6 elements, which means 5 nodes. And you see here with x squared, where the second derivative gets larger as you go to the right, nodes get denser and denser. Here for the Gaussian, where it's a relatively fine Gaussian, so all the second derivative, or the second derivative sits mainly here at the center. All nodes are close to the center. Okay, that's somehow what you expect. Now, next thing that you want to do is compare this with a minimizer as you would get it from a gradient descent using all of the variables, right? So you, as I said earlier, at finite n, you have a finite, so n minus 1 node positions, and you have n minus 1 function values. So it's a finite dimensional variation problem. So you write down your mechanical and or you at finite n, you write down your mechanical and configurational equilibrium and try to solve this. How do you do this? Well, it's a non-convex problem. So at finite n, what you do, you put it on a computer and you do some gradient descent. Well, so okay, this is fairly standard. And what you get in this way is something. Well, if you believe that with the gradient descent is the right way to find your minimum, or if you believe that your gradient descent will always lower the energy, then this is a way of somehow testing the solution that we just find via the asymptotic method, how good it is, testing the quality of this the previous method that I suggested. And that's what we're doing here. So we take as a starting point for the gradient descent the solution that we found here, right? Of the nodes, right? And then we try to improve via gradient descent the solution. And we're happy if we see that we're not able to improve much. Then we see that our initial idea to solve it via the asymptotic formulation is really not that bad. And this is what we get. So here you see the relative errors of the solution and the finite element solution. So it's the actual solution, finite element solution. It's a relative error in L2, so you divide by the L2 norm of the actual solution. Similar here in W12, so you take the gradients, and so it makes more sense to look at the gradients. In the gradients, you don't see any difference between this gradient, so between this asymptotic mesh formalism, so the one where you use the asymptotic functional in order to find your node positions, and then try to improve it by gradient descent. You don't have any improvement at all. We're already very good. But this is much better than just taking an equipartition of the nodes, as is to be expected. So here, this means is there you take the reference mesh as you to minimize your energy, which is of course not as good. Right. So this works. Now here, this is a comparison between the positions of the positions of the nodes that you get for these two methods. So again, so I forget which one is red, which one is blue. So this should probably, the red one should be the one that we get by the asymptotic formulation. And then on these, we find these node positions. This is for the quadratic right-hand side. This is for the Gaussian right-hand side. And what you see, if you switch on the gradient descent to improve at finite n the value of the energy, well, they don't move that much, right? In particular, if the number of nodes is high, then what we find with the asymptotic method is already very good. Okay, here the measurement. Okay, this is more or less the same message as in the previous slide. Here you measure, you take these meshes. Again, you think of them as changes of variables, as maps from upstairs to downstairs, and you take the L1 difference between them. And you see, as you for different right-hand sides, as you increase the number of nodes, it happens what should happen. Now the error goes down. This becomes very small. So this is, I mean, in action, what we know from a theoretical level, that minimizers of the discrete problem converge to the minimizers of the limit problem. Okay, to finish. some open questions and mathematically challenging questions. Okay, so mathematically what we've done, it's a nice application of some well-known methods in the calculus of variations. It's maybe not that surprising what comes out in the end. It's more surprising that this hasn't been done before, in my opinion. But this was all in dimension 1. What happens when you go to higher dimensions? What you can still do is formally assume very strong convergence of your finite element solutions to some limit. So your changes of variable yn converge in some strong sense to a limit. That you can absolutely still do. And you assume the v, also these rescaled differences, you also assume that they converge in some sense. And you get, oh, sorry, you get an analog expression, right? You have the second derivative of your energy density with respect to this in the limit, and then this matrix multiplies the Hessian, now the full Hessian of the solution times the gradient of your change of variable to the inverse, right? Okay, let's look at this in the very simplest case. We take the ball in dimension 2 as our domain. We take as the energy density, the Dirichlet problem, 1/2 gradient squared plus FU, 0 boundary conditions. This defines our problem. Okay, for this we can explicitly calculate the solution. Now the solution is, the minimizer of this energy is 1/2 x squared minus 1. Okay, let's write down this asymptotic functional for the change of variables, so for the mesh. What does this become? I mean, this here becomes the identity, this here becomes the identity, this here becomes the identity. All that's left is this. Right? Okay, or in other words, gradient of y squared divided by determinant of the Jacobian squared. And this is a very ugly functional. This is neither rank 1 convex, the integrand, so it's not lower semi-continuous, and it's not coercive in any Sobolev space in any reasonable way. So for the moment, I don't really know what to do with this, right? Okay, you're not in any Sobolev space. You should look at this in in some reasonable space of Sobolev homeomorphisms, right? So the Jacobian determinant of these homeomorphisms should be non-negative, I assume. But still, I mean, this does not help you very much, I fear. And this difficulty of non-coercivity is also, of course, present at finite n. So you can't even get started with some compactness argument that will give you convergence to some limit. And the question then becomes, is it possible to do something on the level of solutions instead? Is it possible if you know, okay, maybe gamma convergence is asking too much here. Maybe you should look at solutions of these things and then show convergence to some limit. But even in this particular case, I mean, this is really the very easiest that you can do in 2 dimensions. There I'm able to show that yes, okay, you converge to the identity. Well, because I mean, if you think about it, here the Hessian determinant is the identity. What you want, of course, is then your optimal asymptotic mesh should be the identity, so the uniform mesh everywhere, right? If the second derivative is uniform, also your mesh should be uniform. That should be the solution. Okay, that I'm able to show that in this case, yes, you get convergence to this uniform to the identity, but that's it. More if you change anything else, I don't know what to do after this. So yeah, maybe I don't know other things. Looking at the solutions, maybe not necessarily for elliptic problems, but maybe for hyperbolic problems might also be a thing. Hyperbolic problems that come from a variational principle that we might look at in the future. And then maybe a last comment. I was proving the upper and lower bounds by hand. more or less. Yeah, so I was using these standard results from the calculus of variations, and then integrating integrating by hand on the micro scale, and this is the way that I presented, or the idea of the proof. And somehow this should be two-scale convergence, right? You have a micro scale, there you have a contribution of the energy, and then you have weak convergence, although on the macro scale, which also gives you a contribution. I have not been quite able to. So I have tried to take the results, the literature on two-scale convergence and apply this here. I've not quite been able to do that. The problem is that two-scale energy is, two-scale convergence, pardon me, is very much wedded to this idea that you have, that you know very exactly where your microscale is. And here, well, yes, I know very exactly where my macro scale is, but downstairs in the reference configuration. And my energy estimates live upstairs. And this somehow creates a problem. At least it's not straightforward to apply these two-scale convergence theorems. So I will keep thinking about this. Maybe there's a slight generalization of maybe you can of two-scale convergence possible in which these results can be formulated. But the idea should be that of two-scale convergence. Okay, and I'll finish with that, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Time for a short, quick question. Anybody? No. Luciano, Shano, and Sergio.
So my question is maybe a silly question about your algorithm. I mean, you have a PD problem, which is an elliptical problem, and then you are looking for the best strategy to solve with the finite element method, and so you need to resample the mesh. So you have a reference mesh, and then you move the nodes in other positions. So can you directly relate the given problem with the right position of the mesh, or you have to solve the couplet problem, that is, find a solution and at the same time find the optimal position of the new nodes?
So in a sense, the result that I presented is an answer to this question, right? So this is what I suggested in this method of using the asymptotic formulation for to get an approximation of the optimum position of the nodes, even if you have finitely many nodes. What this requires, of course, if you look at the formulas, is a knowledge of the solution, as you suggested there. So it does precisely what you were asking for.
So a question on the function spaces. I mean, in your oscillatory term, you have the square of a derivative of something which is in W12 divided by the square of a measure, which at first, because y is in BV, right? Yes. So at first it doesn't make sense. Then, of course, in the real example, in the examples you present, everything is smooth and the problem disappears. Is there a way to make sense of that in the situation where the functions are not so regular?
So let's go back to the formulation of the functional. So this element here is supposed to be a smooth solution. What you have in the denominator, this is the known solution, right? In the numerator, right? And then in the denominator, you have this the squared of the derivative of this function that lives in BV. But okay, so one has to be careful, right? Just to what I'm talking about here is only in a first sense only the absolutely continuous part of that measure, right? Of the limit measure when you pass to BV, right? For the singular part, you just set it to 0, the whole thing. If you have a positive numerator, no problem at all, right? And then as I said before, okay, if you have something positive and then the absolutely continuous part is, or the square of it is or the square in the denominator is non-integrable, you set the whole thing to plus infinity.
Okay, we are ready to resume. some people have moved online. Hello to the people online. The next speaker is Dan-Xing Liu from the University of Eindhoven. And she's going to speak about liquid crystal polymer morphogenesis towards interactive and morphing soft machines. Dan-Xing?
Thank you, Antonio, for the invitation. And I'm happy to be here to discuss the morphology. And unlike the previous, like on the mathematics, I will mainly focus on the application. So maybe it is a nice opportunity to say how those curvature can be applied for the application, that, for example, soft robotics or haptics. So I will start with what we are doing or interested in Eindhoven in our group. And in our group, we are interested in material itself and how we could use the material to bridge the interaction between human and the material, or the human between the machines. And as illustrated here, this interaction we mainly focus by the touch. And this touch can be, for example, the material change the surface topography, the material that can generate fibers for you to touch. The material can make the suction cup for the finger to feel, or by softness change, or by release the chemistry. So you can feel the dynamic of the outside. And then because of this conference, I will mainly focus on how the morphology of the morphing, either morphing surface or morphing actuators, could bring the tactile or the sensation to human, or how the interaction could be built up by the materials morphing and the human touch. So what we have envisioned is that we have the material, for example, that can be a coating surfaces. These coating surfaces can going from flat state to the corrugated states as illustrated here. And this change can be triggered by the external stimuli, for example, light, electricity, or the temperature. Now, this surface deformation can address the mechanical receptor of human upon touching. And for example, you can feel the change, such as the change of the friction, change of the shear, and the modulus change. Now, also, this surfaces itself is a sensor. So when you touch that, and the surface could sense and report the feedback. And therefore, we can link the surface that has actuation and sensing. Therefore, the surface itself is a machine. Now, why we focus on the preliminary or coating or the things on the rigid substrate? This is because if it is a coating or can be adhere for any rigid substrate, either curved or flat, then we can apply to many devices, make the existing device interactive with human. For example, here I illustrated the steering wheel, the robotic fingertips, and the touch screen over here. And I will give examples later on. Now, since we have to deal with the material, we are material groups, and I would like to use a few words to say about the materials we have here. I'm not going to the chemistry because here I suppose majority are mathematicians. So I will simply say the material we are using. Actually, it's called liquid crystals. You're familiar with the term liquid crystals from the display LCD. And actually, many of you have at least one LCD screen at home on your tablet or PC or your television. Now, for the screen, the liquid crystal display mainly focus on the optical property. But for this work, since we are dealing with the touch, we look into the mechanical property of the liquid crystal, and I will explain how it is different than other material. But I would like to say only one word here is that this is not the liquid. In your screen display, it is still a little bit liquid. However, we have a polymer network. This means that the surface is plastic. So you can touch, you wouldn't deteriorate the surfaces. And we have a number of those molecules. In the world, the largest library of this molecule is Merck. Merck is a liquid crystal company. And in our group, we have the second largest library of this molecule. And this means that we can play around the formulation and generate the material that formulation or the coating that is needed for the mechanical property. Now comes to the important slides, why we're using liquid crystal for its mechanical property, why it is different from the other material. This liquid crystal has a special property that initially it is highly ordered, just thinking of rod-like matches, and it has highly ordered state. Once we decrease the decrease of the order, we have the anisotropic deformation. This means that we have expansion in two directions perpendicular to the molecular direction and contraction that's parallel to that. Now, this is rather unique since most of the material that is isotropic material can only expand when you decrease the order or when you heat it up. While liquid crystal, we have the expansion and the contraction simultaneously occur in one material. Now, to trigger this molecular decretion or the order parameter reduction, we can done by play around the chemistry, can use moisture gas, can also using light. In that case, we need to incorporate light responsive molecule to the system. And this is why this example here, it appears yellow. And of course, we also can do with the electricity. And nowadays, most of people or the industry interested in the electricity, as it can be directly integrated into the current electronic device. Now, this is the basic phenomena. I want to directly start it here, that we can generate actually together with our collaborator from Zaragoza University in Spain, we can generate various surface deformation by printing, using 4D printing the liquid crystals. And here I want to specifically show this example that the film can change from the flat to cone shape. And this is done by the azimuthal alignment. And we heard from the first lecture, and we know how special or it is difficult that to have a flat surface directly come to the cone shape without tearing. Now, we are not the mathematical theoretic group. We are not focused on the calculation of this. We are mainly thinking of the application of this. Now, this change reminds us the suction cup from the robotics, from the octopus. And then we can have the surface from flat to cone or the other way around. In that case, we can actually press out the air, generate negative pressure as the octopus could do. And in that case, we can pick up, in this case, a flat surface, a glass plate that is more than 1,000 times heavier than the material itself. Now, besides picking up this glass plate, we further integrated this into a full robotic system. What you can see here is that our suction cup is over here, picking up a ball, and you see the robotic arm that can rotate and can shrink because this is leverage up and going down to pick and place the ball, and can eventually rotate back to the initial state. And I would like to emphasize that the entire robotic arm, including the suction cup, that's done by all the same material. Now, since we can use this suction cup to pick up the a flat surface, and we actually was in contact with the company so-called Precise, that is our university startup. What they are doing is that they are doing robotic surgery for eye surgery, and they are known because they can use this to move the piece of membrane in the eyes to let the partially blind people regain their vision. And what they are doing here, the normal procedure is have the needle go into the eyes and find the membrane and pick it up and remove that. However, this requires a lot of training of the surgeon, and still it is highly risky that the surgery would fail. So what they approach us is to we are thinking how about develop the robotic the needles. Instead of using needles, we're using suction cup. And here what you see the video is this is the real surgical robotic arm. And this is a waveguide of the light. And we're using light. And over here is our suction cup. And you can see here that by sending the light from this waveguide, we can have the suction cup from flat to the cone shape or the other way around. And with that, we can stick to the membrane and remove that. And I would like to say this is preclinic eye bulb and only for the demonstration of the proof of the principle. It is not really eyes. Now, after we prove this, in another step is that we are considering, normally in the robotic surgery, the surgeon has to focus on the monitor to see where the membrane you need to be peeled. And then we would like to have a more intelligent system that the surface could, the suction cup could automatically find the area that's of interest to pick up and then start deformation. With that, we make the capacitor of our film. And then once it close in contact with the surface, for example, in this case, finger, and then we have the electrical signal would change. And this give the indication that, okay, the robotic arm or suction cup should start action. Now, we have discussed the robotic arm, the suction cup, that we have the azimuthal alignment, and we go from flat surface to cone shape. And I would like to make a step to another deformation, also the morphing, and that's also by the interaction with human. We're all familiar with mimosa. Once you touch that, it not only deform, but also it transition the signal that one start to deform and the consequential leaves start also to fold. And we would like to mimic this. So what we are doing here is that, again, use 3D or 4D printing technique. It is called 4D because eventually the printed material can change its shape over time. And therefore we add the time function as 4D. And then we print this leaf, and the leaf will functionize with the electrodes. And because of the stiffness mismatch between the side with the electrode and the side without, once we start actuate, once we start to bring the electricity, we can have this nice bending deformation. And then we can have the make the electrodes with actuating electrode set and sensing electrode set. And therefore, once actuating start, the signal pass down to the second, and the sensing function receive the signal and actuate the second. And in this case, we can mimic mimosa. Not here, we bend the film, and this deformation could pass from the first leaves to the last leaf in this case. Now, thinking of the touch, and then we also want to have the material interact with the human. And the nicest, the most touch is via the fiber that has the most surface area for the touch. And here is the artistic image, shows that we have the fiber and human hands go for the touch. And with that image, we start mimic this the deformation. Now, in order to have the fibers, and we have the design the machine to do this ourselves, we first make the liquid crystal or the material mixture that's very viscous to control its viscosity. And we use the drawing mechanism. Just imagine you have a chewing gum that is viscous, and you pull it up, and from there you can have the thin fibers formed. And using the same idea that we have the draw plate of material, and we have a counter plate to draw the material. And here we use UV illumination photopolymerization process to freeze in this fiber into a polymer network. Therefore, you can touch it. So this is the final shape of the fiber. Now, with the fiber, and what we can see, it is the branch of the array of fiber. And in the first case, we're using light to deform the fiber. So the fiber again has the bending deformation. The reason for this fiber to have the bending deformation is that we have light sensitive molecule in this fiber. And then it is since it is drawing like a stretching, so all the molecular alignment is going through the shear direction. Therefore, in this schematic, you can see that the fiber, the longitude direction is molecular direction. And we're shining light from one side. Since we have dye molecule, only light can penetrate limited distance in the fiber's diameter. And therefore, the fiber always bend towards with the light. And after the light doesn't penetrate through the entire fiber because of the dye. And therefore, the fiber can bend. As we shining with the light, the fiber always follow the light direction, as you can see here. And the light will move to the other direction, and fiber would follow. Now, this is already nicely showed that using light, we can bend the fiber from the straight to the bended deformation. And think of how human hand could get into touch with that. It is rather difficult because first, you don't want to hand too exposed to the light. And second of all, the hand, when it's touched the fiber, might also interfere the light exposure. And from there, we start thinking of a different method to bend the fiber. For that, here you see again the fiber in the body, that is where we want to touch. To let us touch, we decide how about we actuate from the bottom. Once we contract the bottom and the bottom becomes shorter and the fiber automatically would bend towards the direction that is contracted, while the body of the fiber wouldn't be affected. And for that, we decide to design electrodes circuit ourselves to locally select which part of the fiber that should be bent and controlled by the electricity. Now, here's the results of one of the fibers showing here. This is, again, the body of the fiber, and this is the bottom of the fiber. And we want to bend the fiber by here just creating force in this corner, and the fiber could be bent. And together with Antonio and his student, we can successfully reconstruct this experiment from the simulation. Now, with electricity control, and we make one step further to introduce using a finger to control. We develop an app system ourselves, and then in this app, this is actually the screen of the mobile phone. We swipe the move into touch the mobile phone, and the fiber would follow to which direction that is bent. And again, this is the top view of the fiber, and those points are the foot, and this is where we start to adjust the deformation. And the idea of that is that to get into the bending, the fiber bending, to make it integrate into a wearable device. And we have the discussion with the psychologist that during COVID, most of people start using online system for have a video phone call, video conference. However, what is really missing over there, it is that the people, the sensation of the touch, like the padding or touch sensation is fully missed. And that actually caused a quite somewhat psychological problem. And therefore, psychiatrists actually come to us and say, if we can co-develop this fiber and to mimic that people are touching you or you are petting the dog or cats at the pet at home for the soothing effect. And this is our next step to develop wearable devices to have the online virtual communication to add the haptic or tactile sensation. Now, we can have the fibers, as we say, the fiber can bend and you can touch and can generate a number of effects. However, one thing of that fiber already existing is that it is rather, the outside force might easily break down the fibers because it is always there and will be touched. And then another idea is that how about we switch off the fiber to let the surface just to be flat. Only when we need the fiber, we actuate that. And for that reason, we come back to this asymptotic alignment. Remember the previous slides, what we have is one asymptotic alignment and form the cone. Now we confine this asymptotic alignment into the rigid substrate, and we only further amplify the formation of the cone shape. And because the surface implant deformation is confined, and that can be really exaggerated or manifest as forming a pointing surface as mimicking the fiber from the here. And also the experiment shows that this is a real-time video of experiment shows the formation of the fiber from a flat surface, and this can be switched on and off either using heat or using light. And we can see here that we can reach the deformation of more than 85% of the deformation. This means that if we have 10 micrometers coating, 0.5 micron deformation would be created. That's almost 1 micron. And then besides, we can have the fibers formed for the mechanical effect. if we have the surface covered with gold, for example, we can actually tune the optical property from a flat to the diffraction, as you can see here, just by forming the surface roughness with different pattern, and then the gold, we can start illustrate patterns at the surfaces. Now, besides forming the fiber, we want to have the fiber to be touched by human because it has maximum contact area. And actually thinking of the touch, we were inspired by a Braille display, and that is for blind people. Nowadays, blind people, most of them still using the traditional swell paper. That is the static, then they get very thick book to touch. And some of them have already so-called dynamic Braille display. That's by using the piezo pins, so the pins can popping up, going down. And that pin array is first, it's rather heavy. You have to always have the size of a keyboard and this thick connect to your device, and it is easily be deteriorated. And then therefore we want to have something that is to bring the life easier for blind people. Therefore, we start creating dots that are similar to the Braille dot. And then we make the device showing that we can also generate those dots, either altogether or locally to mimic a Braille display. However, while doing this, we realized that the Braille display is not the most important. Actually, not for blind people. In all the display, actually, there is a trend that the display should become interactive by deformation. And this is the video I recorded during IMIT conference last year in South Korea. And this is the screen of Samsung. And they make the conceptual screen showing that their futuristic idea is that the screen shouldn't just like solid we have now, but can change the surface and therefore to be deformed. And therefore this deformation can interact with people. Now, what they don't have, and the unique of that is that first, their screen is very soft. It is quite liquid using gel-like the material. Therefore, the entire screen is covered by a transparent box we cannot touch. And second of all, the surface has only one deformation. The entire surface must deform. And therefore, there is no local deformation can be generated. And using this idea, deformation not only on the screen, but also this brings us back again to blind people. As I said, the Braille display is not exactly interesting for blind people because many only born blind people can read a Braille display, and most of blind people using audio. However, what they are missing is that the access to touch the image, especially dynamic image, that's very difficult because the pin-based device cannot provide it, even can provide, this is unaffordable price. This one only showed in conference, I think it is more than 100K, and even this is not for sale. So with that, we were thinking to use our dot can generate it, and using those dots to generate selectively tune different area of this dot to generate multiple images for blind people. And we are doing the perception test with the psychologist at our university. Now, here with this video, I would like to show you that although it is not a real display yet, how you can see the surface would, feel the surface would change. Because the entire thing is transparent, we cannot see. Therefore, we make it phase transition to let you see, make it more clear that the surface could deform and the bubbles could form, and you can directly see over here. And this is a dynamic progress, can be reversible. And now together with the company, we're developing the first demonstration to show that this surface deformation can be used for the touch screen, for example, at the smart watch size for blind people. Now, those surfaces are made by a lithography method, but we also want to using the the self-assembly method to make it. And what you can see here is the torus structure in liquid crystal. And I will explain a little bit of what is it in the next slides. And what you can see here is these structures embedded so-called in a homeotropic media. And the black area standing for the area that is molecules perpendicular. And here actually molecule make a half pi rotation. And with this self-alignment or configuration of the molecule, what we can have is that generate surface with large area that can transition from the negative indentation and to the flat surface, which are not showing here, and eventually transit to the surface profile. And again, this process is reversible. Once we stop lighting illumination or heat, and this protrusion can force back to the flat surface and initially to the negative indentation. And then here is the video showing that how this surface deformation starts to occur from the relatively flat surface and to highly protruded surfaces. Not only following this idea, not only we can generate one protrusions from surface area, but we can also play around how molecular alignment goes. In this case, the molecular alignment, think of it a little bit like a onion shape because there are multiple 2-pi rotation over here. And in this case, we can generate more complex surface deformation, for example, like this volcano shape. Now, here I would like to bring a little bit why this torus could form, and I will introduce the next topic on the fingerprints. So in this case, we introduce chirality in the system. Naturally, the helix axis is perpendicular to the substrate. However, in this case, we modify the surface to let the helix axis to rotate 90 degrees and let the helix axis parallel to the surface. And then molecules start to rotate over the surfaces area. As you can see here molecules are perpendicular, represents the, in general, so-called homeotropic alignment, and they start to rotate, and to certain area, they are parallel to the surfaces. And from that rotation, we get so-called fingerprint structure. Again, the black area corresponding to the molecule that's perpendicular. The lighten up area represent molecule parallel to the surfaces. And this is the chirodopant we use to introduce chirality. And again, surface is already, the substrate is pre-treated to rotate the helix axis parallel to the surfaces. Now, this is under the microscope, and then without microscope, what we can see is that this surface area, that initially it is rather flat. When heating up or using electrical field, I would like come back here, the colored area would coming up, the black area would going down. And in this case, as I said, for many applications, electricity-driven is preferred because that can be directly integrated into electronic device. You don't want to heat because that might destroy your device or upon touching, and you also don't want to have light because the dye molecule would decrease the lifetime of the system. Now, this is again the real-time measurement of how the surface change when apply electrical field. And you can see that directly applying electrical field and surface are formed. And in this case, I want to bring your attention to this molecule. This molecule has a large dipole moment defined by the cyano group here. So allow the system to be interactive with the electrical field. Once we apply electrical field, we have again the bright area coming up, the black area going down, and form this surface topography. Now, our university is technical university. Once we form something like this, we always think what we can do with that. So we're always looking for the application. One of the application is to help this man. This is actually in the Dutch newspaper that this man from China is cleaning solar panels. On Monday, he cleaned this here, and the weekend come back to the other side of the solar panel, and the next week he needs to start over again. Now, the idea is that how can we help this man to let him not to clean the solar panels? With that, we start the experiment. We buy the modeled sand. The size is around a few hundred micrometer in diameter. And we put sand on the piece of substrate. And this substrate, we can see here, this is a glass substrate already with electrode pattern. And the electrodes are made by ITO, therefore it is transparent. And I would like to mention that surface area, only 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter. And this is the surface. We put the sand over here, and we tilt this sample slightly to let gravity helps a little bit. Now, also the device directly connect to the oscilloscope, and therefore we can see that directly once the electric field is applied directly within 1 second, 96% of the sand are removed. This is done by the surface, dynamic surface vibration. We can use mechanical force to slide down the sand and create so-called self-cleaning function without the water. Normally, self-cleaning function are generated by create highly hydrophobic surface, but that's always involving the water. In this case, so we can use mechanical force to remove the sand. Now, after developing this, we've been contacted by NASA. Because they have a problem with their Mars rover. Mars rover applied a few years ago. They have continuously lost 3 Mars rover because of the sandstorm in the Mars. After one sandstorm, the solar panels are covered by the sand, and therefore they don't have the source to power the entire Mars rover. And then therefore they contact us if we can put our coating directly on the solar panels and using the dynamic surfaces as we saw before to directly remove the sand from the solar panels, as you cannot send people like astronauts to really to clean your surfaces. And if this works, not only the solar panels, we can apply our coating also to the optical lens or the mechanical component to make sure that in the environment like Mars and there's no people and still let it have the self-cleaning function to still be able to power. Now, after that, this topic, I want to continue with that. We create this surface. As I said, we are not only create the surface from flat to the corrugated, we also can create the surface from the indentation and to the topography. Actually, what we can do is actually to reverse the surface. We create the wavy surface and apply electrical field or light or thermal. The high point go low and the low point go high. And we can control this by play around the chemistry. I don't go to the details of the chemistry. If you are interested in this, we can discuss later on. So, as I said, we can have the surface inverted. And in the next application, we're thinking, how about we make a switchable adhesion using this function? And what we do here is that we have the wavy surface and the blue point here that we make the adhesive. And this adhesive we use is the same protein that muscle adhere to the rock. So it is a very strong adhesive and can survive in the water. And then initially in the air, like this point is facing the air. So we have the adhesive state. And then we switch on the light. And now we can now start to inverse the surface. So the adhesive part going to the bottom, the non-adhesive part now is facing the air. So the surface in general go from the adhesive state to non-adhesive state. And we can also measure by AFM, measure the force. This is the adhesive state and this is non-adhesive state. We can see the force different between these two states. So, and therefore we can make our first demo, like we can using light to change a surface from sticky to non-sticky. And we use this surface to adhere to that object, a copper plate, and it is adhered, and we can transfer to another plate and place, and then we shining with the light, and then we go from the adhesive state to non-adhesive state. We can release. And talking of the fingerprints, we see that we're using fingerprint structure to clean the surface, to have the adhesive to non-adhesive. Then we are thinking of how about to take a better look at the fingerprints. We see we have the rigid structure like our human fingerprints. What we also see that in our fingerprints, not only we have the rigid structure, we also eject liquid from our fingerprint. That's can be oil, can be water, and that is so how you leave marks at the surfaces. So we decided to mimic this by again create the surface that can morph. Actually, in this case, we create porous structure. And what you can see here is the same image, show that we create porous structure in the dimension of a few hundred nanometer of the pore size. And here I would like to mention, in order to create this pores, we need to include porogen that is also liquid crystal and to initially blend into this system. And what we will do is that we contract these surfaces, let it deform, and this deformation could close the pores, and the close of the pores could eject liquid from the surfaces. Again, one way to do this is by light, but we can do by electricity or the other ways. And this is a typical light molecule that we co-polymerize in our light responsive system. And then initially we have molecule standing perpendicular to the surface, and upon shining with the light, they collapse, and you see the pore close. And then we can see from the microscopy image that the surfaces the liquid is released from the surfaces. Shining with the light, you see this liquid coming to the surfaces. And what is nice over here is that not only we can release the liquid, but also we can reabsorb this liquid, which doesn't exist in nature. This gives another hint that once we eject the liquid, we can refill the pores with a different liquid or the same liquid. And here we have then the example of showing how to release the liquid into to have the chemical reaction. What we have here is this yellow part is our material. This is glass plate, and our material is only 3 micrometers adhere to this glass plate. And in this case, we make it electrical responsive, and that's why we have an oscilloscope here to show the signal. And we use the acid-base reaction because that can generate color. So we directly know the chemical reaction happen. So we release acid into base, and you see that slightly the bars become red because the chemical reaction. And then this takes a while. For example, I think in this case takes like 5 minutes to fully make the water bars fully color even. I would like to say 5 minutes is diffusion time of the chemicals, but not the release. The release will happen within 1 to 2 seconds, and the liquid can be ejected. And besides release chemicals, the acid, we can also release drugs. For example, we show that we can release ibuprofen in this case to have different functionalities. Now, we are inspired by the fingerprints that not only has the rigid structure, but also can release liquid. Now we show that we can release liquid. Then we come back to this fingerprints structure. I would like to mention this is why it's called fingerprints in liquid crystal, because every time it is a self-assembling process. Every time you coat the surface, you try to make this fingerprint structure, it is always different. You cannot find 2 identical fingerprints, the structure, and therefore people like used to this analogy to human fingerprints. Therefore, those random structure in liquid crystal are called fingerprints. Again, here we form the chiral system in the film, and the helix axis now is parallel to the coating substrate. And then we have the area that should shrink. Here it is a molecule that perpendicular and parallel, they don't shrink. So in this case, we have only area, that is, we have molecule perpendicular could eject liquid, while the other areas liquid doesn't eject. This is also quite like our human fingerprints, because if you see here that we only mainly eject liquid from the rigid area, and in that case, we can show that in our random structure, also the liquid are controlled from the released predominantly from the rigid surfaces. Now, with that in mind, we are taking one step further. Previously, we can eject a material, like porogens and ibuprofen acid, but we also want to eject polar material like water or ethylene glycol. In that case, we add the hydrogen bond to change its polarity. And in this case, we can embed the ethylene glycol into the system and to be this use of the patch. This is actually was co-developed with BD company. BD is a medical company, and they have a practical problem is that for the for many patients, you go to hospital, you have the patch to contact to your skin for the monitor your signature to monitor the signal of the body. However, they also have many burnt people, so the skin is burnt. And then if you have this patch to the skin, once you remove, you take away the skin. That's a serious problem. So they came to us, ask if our eject liquid would help. In that case, we use ethylene glycol as the lubricant to help remove this patch, and using ethylene glycol also because it's biocompatible liquid. And from here, we did the test of a peeling test. We show that without release ethylene glycol, we have quite high force to peel, and with releasing of the ethylene glycol, the peel force is largely reduced. And in this case, we're using UV light to trigger. The idea is also can either light using a micro LED system or electrical field that release this ethylene glycol on demand. Now, after all this, I would like to now bring you back to Netherlands, where our university is located. I didn't do at the beginning of this lecture. Now I want to say that this is Netherlands. This is where Eindhoven is located. Most of people know Eindhoven because of the soccer stadium, soccer team. Many of you might know or not know. And then also people might know this because of Philips. But today I'm not talking neither soccer or Philips. I'm going to talk of this small town that is near Eindhoven, so-called Nuenen. That is by car around 10 minutes driving. What is special of this town? It is hometown of Vincent van Gogh. And in this town, to memorize him, we have so-called the light path that go to the night. When you're cycling here, the path is illuminated. They call the starling night. And then we had a look at of the real painting of the starling night at this. And we want to mimic this painting. And especially we want to bring this dynamic to interactive. So we start mimic this painting by using liquid crystal. When we're looking into this painting, the first thing we notice that it has multiple color. And to translate this into liquid crystal and even later imaging this, it is very difficult because from the molecular translation to the lithography, it is black and white. So if for the entire painting, if we don't separate color and we cannot really translate, and then what we can do, what we need to do is first have the group of color cluster. We use this so-called K-mean cluster method to have all the clusters selected and the color and clustered. And each cluster, each color cluster should corresponding to certain liquid crystal molecular alignment. One thing I didn't tell is that liquid crystal molecule could generate birefringence color. And you can see that on the cross polarizer. And depends on the tilting angle implant, for example, you see different color. So we must using this corresponding to the birefringent color to over here. The first step is to have colors cluster, and after color cluster, we go to a digital mask. That is lithography, but we don't use a real mask. We just use a mirror to redirect the light. And once with different mask corresponding to a different color cluster. And then we freeze them, we pattern the surface with different alignment layer, still no liquid crystal yet. After the alignment layer, we put liquid crystal in, and we can already see some nice color surfaces as this. And here, just by heating and cooling, we can have the image coming up from the surface or let it fully disappear if we start heating up to let the material now can go to isotropic state. Now it is the state that we have the color, then I show this again, and we can have a color state, and we heat it up so the color fade out, only leave black, and we cooling down, and we can bring the color back to the painting again. Now, we can mimic this nice color. And the next step, we look into more detail into the painting. And we know it is oil painting. So besides the color, you can see, you also see the stroke of your brush. And the next step or the task for us is to mimic this stroke. So we come back to the basic liquid crystal principle. We start from the aligned state. Actually, the color you showed, they are aligned. And then we decrease the alignment. So then we freeze in. If we confine the in-plane deformation, all the deformation can only goes to the surface of the coating. And this hopefully can give us the surface profile of that painting. And in the past, we know that just by combination of, for example, cholesteric, chironemtic or perpendicular, we really can have the surface that changes surface profile from flat to corrugated. And in this case, what we do is that since this is our painting, we have liquid crystal with different tilted angle, and different tilted angle brings different degrees of the deformation. And therefore, we can also, upon heating or light, bring up this color, bring the surface, not only the color, but the deformation. What you see here, the scale bar doesn't, the color scale bar is not the color, but indicate the height. So here we have the color and we have the surface profile of this painting. And with that, I would like to stop my presentation here. So we showed we want to, in our group, we want to have the material to be interact with human, with the environment, and we have using liquid crystal molecule, we have the interaction by making the surface change of the surface that could eject liquid. And we collaborate this with a company to further bring this to the next step, then only stay at academia level. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and also thank for the students in the group who contribute in one way or another to the content. And also I would like to thank you for the funding source, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Danqing. Comments or questions? Luciano was first.
My question is very simple. What is the volume fraction or the solid fraction for the application with liquid? So how much volume can you release with a given volume of?
Yeah, I have to say it is very minimal. The best case we can release is 10% to 20%, but it is not enough. We are also looking towards the way to increase the volume release. Now it is in the best system, 20%.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, in the normal 5%, because there's a good balance between liquid and the network. If too much network, we have good contraction force, and then you can release more liquid. But then you don't have much liquid in the system. And if you have too much liquid, you don't have enough network to squeeze them out. So that's a dedicated balance.
Yeah, that was very impressive. I would have a question concerning the self-assembly process to get this fingerprint structures. So you mentioned that well, after actuation or you always find that always leads to different structures, right? So it's never the same. That's why the name fingerprint. And I assume you probably want that your surface always gives the same properties, even if assembled differently. Did you kind of quantify some structure in this? Or so what I have in mind, if is your surface somehow maybe hyper uniform or something like that? Did you look at that?
First is the fingerprint structure. Fingerprint structure is defined before actuation. So every time you process, that's different. But when you actuate, they're always the same. Yeah. And then that way, we like to, so actuation part, it is always the same, but processing make it very unique for each patch or each sample. And then even you can make that if you're using lithography, you can use the finger, you can also make fingerprints, but you can control the pattern. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. We are recording.
Thank you. What is the basic alignment mechanism that you use to align the molecules on the surface?
We use multiple ways. Traditionally, it is really by the polyimide, like a rubbing method. That's also the method using in display. But this rubbing, so you coat it and you rub to create microgroove. But this method actually introduce extra dust, into the system. Nowadays, the most modern way is to use photo alignment. You have a photo alignment material and use light. The molecule always align perpendicular to the vector of the incoming light. And this is what we are using, especially for the complex one. And that is also now display industry switch to the photo alignment. Yeah.
I just wanted to thank you. I mean, thank you very much for the beautiful talk. I will try to act a little bit. I know that you're busy, so you will not be with us in the next few days. But I will try to, act as a communicator channel, because in the next few days there will be many more things related to the stuff. So you gave us the confidence that the story that shaping things can lead to functions. It's not a myth. It's a reality. Thank you very much. Thank you.